Hello, my best students, and welcome back to Learn English with Clara. My name is Clara, and today I want you to imagine something simple. Tomorrow morning, you leave your home. You walk into a coffee shop, you order your drink, and while you're waiting, someone standing beside you makes a small comment. Nothing important, nothing extraordinary, just a few words. You have two choices. You can smile politely, look back at your phone, and end the interaction. Or you can say something back. One sentence, then another. 5 minutes later, you're having a real conversation with someone you had never met before. Maybe you'll never see that person again. Maybe they'll become a friend. Maybe they'll tell you something you'll remember for years. Maybe they'll introduce you to an idea, an opportunity, or even a completely different way of seeing the world. That's the strange thing about strangers. Every person you know today was once one of them. Your closest friend was a stranger. Your favorite teacher was a stranger. Your future colleagues, business partners, and friends, many of them are strangers right now. They're people whose stories you haven't heard yet. And still, millions of us walk through crowded cities every day surrounded by people while speaking to almost nobody. We sit beside each other, wait beside each other, travel beside each other. Then we take out our phones and disappear into our own little worlds. Why? Because talking to someone we don't know feels risky. What should I say? What if the conversation becomes awkward? What if they ignore me? What if I make a mistake? And for English learners, there's another fear. What if my English isn't good enough? But here's what makes this topic so interesting. The conversations you're avoiding may be exactly the conversations you need. Talking to new people can teach you how to listen, how to react naturally, how to ask better questions, how to deal with uncomfortable silence, how to understand different personalities, and most importantly, how to stop believing that every conversation needs to be perfect. Today, we're going to explore the psychology of talking to strangers. We'll discover why your brain often predicts rejection before anything has even happened. Why most people underestimate how much they'll enjoy conversations with strangers, how small interactions can influence your confidence and your sense of connection, and how you can start conversations naturally without sounding strange, forced, or fake. And if you're learning English, stay with me until the end, because this lesson may completely change the way you think about speaking practice. You don't need to wait until your English is perfect to start communicating. Sometimes, the conversation itself is the practice. So today, we're not only learning how to speak to strangers, we're learning how to become more comfortable with uncertainty, more curious about other people, and more confident when an opportunity for connection appears unexpectedly. Because behind every unfamiliar face, there may be a conversation worth having. So, let's begin. Truth number 1. Your brain predicts rejection before the conversation even begins. You're waiting for your coffee. Someone is standing beside you. They seem friendly. For a moment, you think about saying something. Maybe you could ask about the drink they ordered. Maybe you could make a simple comment about the long line. But before you open your mouth, your brain creates an entire disaster. What if they ignore me? What if I sound strange? What if they don't want to talk? What if I start the conversation and then have nothing else to say? And suddenly, staying silent feels safer. This is one of the biggest reasons people avoid talking to strangers. The conversation hasn't even started, but your mind has already predicted rejection. And here's the interesting part. You're usually reacting to something that hasn't happened. You aren't afraid of the actual conversation. You're afraid of the conversation you're imagining. Your brain is trying to protect you from social discomfort. Human beings naturally care about acceptance. For most of human history, belonging to a group was extremely important. Being rejected or excluded could have serious consequences. Today, talking to someone at a coffee shop isn't a dangerous situation, but your brain can still treat social rejection as something you should avoid. That's why the first few seconds often feel like the hardest part. Now think about English learners. You see an opportunity to speak English. Maybe there's an international student nearby. A tourist asks for directions. Someone starts a conversation online. You want to respond, but immediately you start imagining mistakes. My pronunciation isn't good enough. What if I forget a word? What if they don't understand me? So you avoid the conversation. And afterward, you feel disappointed because you missed another opportunity to practice. But here's the truth. Confidence doesn't usually come before the conversation. It comes from having conversations. You speak. You feel nervous. Maybe you make a mistake. Nothing terrible happens. Then you do it again. And your brain slowly learns something important. I can handle this. That's how social confidence grows. Not by removing every uncomfortable feeling, but by collecting evidence that discomfort isn't dangerous. There's another mistake we often make. We assume strangers don't want to talk. But how do we know? Maybe the person beside you is thinking exactly the same thing. Maybe they're also waiting for someone else to begin. Maybe a simple comment would make their day more interesting. Of course, not everyone will want a conversation, and that's completely normal. The goal isn't to make every stranger like you. The goal is to stop treating every possible rejection as a disaster. Sometimes you'll start a conversation, and it will end quickly. Sometimes it will feel awkward. But sometimes, one small sentence will become 10 minutes of laughter, curiosity, and connection. And you'll realize that the biggest barrier wasn't the stranger. It was the story your mind created before you even said hello. So the next time you want to speak to someone new, don't ask yourself, what if they reject me? Ask something more useful. What might happen if I simply try? Because courage in conversation doesn't mean knowing everything will go well. It means giving reality a chance before your fear decides the ending. Truth number 2. Most people enjoy talking to strangers more than they expect. Here's something strange about human beings. We often avoid experiences that would actually make us feel better. Imagine you're taking a long train ride. Someone is sitting beside you. You have 2 options. Spend the entire journey looking at your phone, or start a conversation. Most people choose the phone. Why? Because silence feels predictable. A conversation doesn't. You don't know whether the other person will be interesting. You don't know what you'll talk about. You don't know whether the interaction will feel comfortable. So your brain makes a simple prediction. Staying alone will probably be better. But that prediction is often wrong. People frequently underestimate how enjoyable a conversation with someone new can be. And there's a reason for this. When you imagine talking to a stranger, you focus on everything that could go wrong. The awkward beginning, the uncomfortable silence, the possibility that you won't know what to say. But when the actual conversation begins, something changes. You become curious. You listen. You react. One topic leads naturally to another. Maybe you discover that you've visited the same city. Maybe you enjoy the same sport. Maybe you're both learning a language. Suddenly, the stranger doesn't feel like a stranger anymore. They become a person with experiences, opinions, problems, and stories. And that's an important psychological shift. From a distance, we see categories: a passenger, a customer, a tourist, a classmate. But conversation turns categories into human beings. Now think about English learners. Many learners spend hundreds of hours studying vocabulary, but very little time having unpredictable conversations. They want to know what the other person will say before speaking. But real communication doesn't work like an exercise in a textbook. Someone changes the subject, makes a joke, uses a word you don't understand, asks an unexpected question. And that's exactly why these conversations are valuable. They teach you how to adapt. Imagine speaking to a tourist for 3 minutes. Your English isn't perfect. You forget a word. You explain it differently. The person understands you. You continue talking. Afterward, you feel something that another grammar exercise might not give you. Evidence. Evidence that your English can work in the real world. And that small experience can change your confidence. There's another reason conversations with strangers can feel surprisingly good. They interrupt routine. Most days are predictable. We visit the same places, speak to the same people, think about the same problems. Then one unexpected conversation introduces something new, a different perspective, a funny story, an interesting recommendation. Sometimes, even a small moment of kindness. Of course, this doesn't mean you need to talk to everyone. Some people prefer quiet. Some situations aren't appropriate for conversation. Social awareness still matters, but don't automatically assume that silence is always better. The person standing beside you may be just as curious, just as nervous, and just as willing to connect as you are. So next time an opportunity appears, try replacing one prediction. Instead of thinking, "This will probably be awkward," think, "This might actually be interesting." Because sometimes the conversation you almost avoided becomes the best part of your day. Truth number 3. Good conversations don't begin with impressive words. They begin with genuine curiosity. Many people make talking to strangers much harder than it needs to be. They think they need the perfect opening line, something clever, something funny, something that immediately makes the other person think, "Wow, this person is interesting." But that's usually not how good conversations begin. Good conversations often start with something completely ordinary. "Is this your first time here?" "What did you order? It looks good." "How do you know the host?" "Have you been waiting long too?" Nothing extraordinary, but that's the point. The goal of your first sentence isn't to impress someone. It's to open a door. And curiosity is one of the easiest ways to do that. Now imagine you're at an event. You meet someone new and ask, "What do you do?" They say, "I'm a photographer." You have 2 choices. You can immediately start thinking about what you're going to say next, or you can become genuinely curious. "What kind of photography do you do?" "How did you get interested in that?" "What's the most interesting place you've ever photographed?" Suddenly, the conversation begins moving naturally. You don't need to carry the entire interaction. You simply need to listen carefully enough to notice where the next question is hiding. And that's something many people miss. Almost every answer contains a possible next question. Someone says, "I moved here last year." You can ask why they moved. Someone says, "I'm learning Spanish." You can ask what made them choose Spanish. Someone says, "I've just returned from a trip." You can ask where they went. Good conversationalists aren't always people with the most interesting stories. Often, they're people who make others feel interesting. And this is especially useful for English learners. You may believe you need advanced vocabulary to have a good conversation. You don't. Simple English combined with real curiosity can take you surprisingly far. In fact, trying too hard to use difficult words may make you more nervous. You're thinking about grammar. searching for impressive expressions, correcting every sentence inside your head. And while you're doing that, you stop listening. But conversation isn't a performance, it's cooperation. One person shares something, the other person responds. Then the conversation grows from there. Now here's a practical habit. When someone answers your question, don't immediately change the subject. Take one detail from their answer and go deeper. If someone says, "I work from home," don't jump to another topic. Ask, "Do you enjoy working from home?" Or, "What's the hardest part about it?" That simple habit makes conversations feel more natural, because people can usually tell when you're waiting for your turn to speak and when you're actually listening. Of course, curiosity also needs boundaries. If someone gives short answers, keeps looking away, or clearly doesn't want to continue, respect that. A good conversation requires two willing people. But when someone seems comfortable and engaged, stop putting pressure on yourself to be fascinating. Be interested. Listen. Notice details. Ask questions because you genuinely want to know the answer. Because the secret to talking to strangers isn't having hundreds of things to say. Sometimes it's knowing how to make another person want to keep talking. And the easiest way to do that is to make them feel that their words are actually being heard. Truth number 4. Awkward silence is not a failed conversation. There's a moment many people fear when talking to someone new. The conversation is going well. You're exchanging questions. You're smiling. You're listening. Then suddenly, silence. Nobody says anything. 1 second passes. Then 2. And your brain immediately starts panicking. Say something. Quickly! This is getting awkward. The conversation is dying. So you grab the first question you can think of. What's your favorite color? Now the conversation is even more awkward. The problem isn't the silence. The problem is the pressure you create because of it. Many people believe a good conversation should flow perfectly from beginning to end. No pauses, no uncertainty, no moments when both people are thinking. But real conversations don't work that way. Even close friends experience silence. People need time to think. A topic naturally ends. Someone gets distracted. Sometimes there simply isn't anything to say for a few seconds. And that's completely normal. Now here's where confidence changes everything. An insecure person experiences silence and thinks, "I'm failing." A confident person experiences the same silence and thinks, "We're just having a pause." Same situation, different interpretation. This is especially important for English learners. When you're speaking your native language, you probably don't panic every time you need a moment to think. But in English, silence can feel like proof that your English isn't good enough. You forget a word, you need time to organize your sentence, and immediately you become nervous. So you rush, you speak faster, you make more mistakes. Then you become even more nervous. But what if you simply allowed yourself to pause? You can say, "Let me think for a second." That's an interesting question. I've never thought about that before. These expressions give you time without making the conversation feel uncomfortable. And more importantly, they sound natural. Native speakers need time to think too. Now imagine you're talking to someone you just met. You've been discussing travel. The topic slowly ends. Silence appears. Instead of panicking, you look around. You notice something happening nearby. You make a simple comment. Or you return to something they mentioned earlier. You said you were learning French. What made you start? The conversation begins moving again. That's an important skill. Good conversationalists don't prevent every silence. They know how to restart a conversation naturally. And sometimes they know when not to restart it. Because not every conversation needs to last 20 minutes. Some interactions are naturally short. You exchange a few words, you smile, you wish the person a good day, and you leave. That's still a successful conversation. The value of an interaction isn't measured by its length. A 2-minute conversation can be meaningful. A 30-minute conversation can be boring. What matters is whether the interaction felt respectful and genuine. So stop treating every quiet moment like an emergency. Silence doesn't automatically mean the other person dislikes you. It doesn't mean you're boring. And it certainly doesn't mean you've failed. Sometimes, silence is simply the space between one interesting thought and the next. And the more comfortable you become with that space, the more confident and natural your conversations will feel. Truth number 5. Every stranger you speak to trains you for bigger conversations later. There's something most people don't realize about confidence. Confidence is rarely built during the biggest moments of your life. It's built before those moments arrive, in small situations, ordinary interactions, short conversations that seem almost meaningless. You ask someone for directions. You speak to the person sitting beside you. You introduce yourself at an event. You make a comment while waiting in line. You ask someone where they're from. None of these conversations seems life-changing, but something is happening quietly. You're training yourself. You're learning how to begin, how to listen, how to respond, how to deal with uncertainty, how to recover when you don't know what to say. And most importantly, you're teaching your brain that talking to new people is something you can handle. Now imagine someone who avoids every possible interaction. They go to school or work. They speak only when necessary. They avoid eye contact. They use their phone whenever they're alone in public. They never introduce themselves first. They wait for other people to begin conversations. At first, this behavior feels comfortable, safe, predictable. But slowly, something happens. Every conversation begins to feel more difficult. A simple introduction creates nervousness. A job interview feels terrifying. A presentation feels impossible. A networking event feels exhausting before it even begins. Why? Because avoidance is also a form of training. Every time you avoid something because of fear, you teach your brain that the situation was dangerous. You tell yourself, I escaped that conversation. And your brain remembers. The next time a similar situation appears, the fear becomes stronger. But the opposite is also true. Every time you speak, despite feeling slightly uncomfortable, you create new evidence. I started a conversation. I didn't know exactly what to say, but I managed. There was an awkward moment, and I survived it. The person didn't seem interested, and I was still okay. I made a mistake, corrected myself, and continued. These experiences may seem small, but confidence is built from evidence, not wishes. You don't become socially confident by standing in front of a mirror and repeating, I'm confident. You become more confident by collecting experiences that prove you can deal with real situations. And talking to strangers gives you those experiences, one conversation at a time. Now think about English learning. Many learners dream about having big conversations. They imagine traveling abroad, working for an international company, passing an important interview, giving a presentation in English, speaking confidently during a business meeting. But they ignore the small conversations available today. They don't ask the tourist a simple question. They don't join the online discussion. They don't speak to the international student. They don't send the voice message. They don't practice introducing themselves. Because those interactions seem too small. But small conversations are where bigger conversations are prepared. Imagine trying to run a marathon without ever running 1 kilometer. It doesn't make sense. You train gradually. 1 kilometer, then 3, then 5. Your body adapts. Your breathing improves. Your confidence grows. Conversation works the same way. You don't suddenly become comfortable speaking English in an important interview. You build that comfort through hundreds of smaller interactions. You learn what to do when you forget a word. You learn how to ask someone to repeat something. You learn how to explain an idea differently. You learn how to react when you don't understand a joke. You learn how to enter a conversation and how to leave one politely. Those are real communication skills, and textbooks alone cannot fully teach them. You need people. You need unpredictability. You need moments when the conversation doesn't follow the plan, because real life doesn't give you a script. Now, here's something else worth understanding. Talking to different people makes you more adaptable. Imagine speaking only with one English teacher. You become familiar with their accent, their vocabulary, their speaking speed, their personality. Then one day, you meet someone completely different. They speak faster. They use unfamiliar expressions. They have a different accent. Suddenly, you struggle. This doesn't mean your English is bad. It means you need more variety. Every new person trains your communication skills differently. One person speaks quietly. Another speaks quickly. Someone tells long stories. Someone gives short answers. One person is extremely friendly. Another is more reserved. Some people understand your pronunciation immediately. Others ask you to repeat yourself. And through all these experiences, you become more flexible. You stop expecting every conversation to be comfortable. You learn to adapt. That's one of the biggest differences between knowing English and being able to use English. Real fluency isn't performing perfectly in ideal conditions. It's communicating when conditions aren't ideal, when you're nervous, when the other person speaks differently, when you forget a word, when the topic changes unexpectedly, when you need to explain something twice. That's where communication ability becomes real. Now imagine you're walking through an airport. Someone asks you a question in English. You answer naturally. Later, you speak to the hotel receptionist. Then you ask someone for a recommendation. Then you meet another traveler and have a 15-minute conversation. To someone watching, you look confident. But that confidence didn't appear at the airport. It was built earlier, in dozens of smaller moments. Every time you chose conversation over avoidance. Every time you accepted a little discomfort. Every time you spoke before feeling completely ready. That's the hidden value of talking to strangers. You aren't only having a conversation with one person. You're preparing yourself for the next 100 people you'll meet. Now let's talk about opportunities. Many of the biggest opportunities in life arrive through conversations we could never have planned. Someone tells you about a job, introduces you to another person, recommends a book, gives you an idea, offers advice, invites you to an event, becomes a customer, a colleague, a mentor, a friend. Of course, most conversations with strangers won't dramatically change your life, and that's okay. You shouldn't speak to people because you're trying to get something from them. But the more comfortable you become connecting with others, the more open you become to unexpected possibilities. Because opportunities often travel through people, and people cannot know you exist if you're always afraid to communicate. Now here's another important lesson. Talking to strangers teaches you that rejection isn't as powerful as you imagined. Sometimes someone won't want to talk. They'll give a short answer. return to their phone, or politely end the conversation. And then, nothing happens. The world continues. You continue your day. You realize that rejection is uncomfortable, but survivable. And that's a powerful lesson, because fear of rejection doesn't only affect conversations, it affects careers, relationships, business, creativity, learning. People don't apply for opportunities because they might hear no. They don't share ideas because someone might criticize them. They don't speak English because someone might notice a mistake. Learning to tolerate small social rejection can make you braver in much bigger areas of life. Now imagine two versions of yourself 5 years from today. The first version continued avoiding conversations, always waiting to feel ready, always afraid of sounding awkward, always hoping confidence would somehow arrive. The second version started small. One conversation, then another. Some went well. Some were boring. Some ended quickly. Some became memorable. But with every interaction, speaking became more natural. Listening became easier. Fear became smaller. Curiosity became stronger. 5 years later, those two versions of you may live very different lives, not because one learned a secret communication technique, but because one was willing to practice being uncomfortable. That's how growth often works. You don't remove fear first. You act, and fear slowly loses its authority. So here's a challenge. The next time you have a safe and appropriate opportunity to speak with someone new, don't try to create an extraordinary conversation. Don't try to impress them. Don't force yourself to speak for 20 minutes. Simply begin. Make one comment. Ask one genuine question. Listen to the answer. See what happens. Maybe the conversation ends after 30 seconds. That's fine. Maybe it continues for 10 minutes. That's fine too. Because the goal isn't to collect strangers. The goal is to become someone who is comfortable connecting with people. Someone who doesn't need every interaction to be perfect. Someone who can handle uncertainty. Listen with curiosity. Speak despite mistakes. And give new conversations a chance. Because every stranger you speak to teaches you something. About communication. About people. About English. And sometimes about yourself. And perhaps one day, you'll walk into an important meeting, an interview, a new country, a classroom, a conference, or a room full of people you've never met. And you'll notice something. You're nervous. But you know how to begin. You know how to ask questions. You know how to listen. You know how to recover from silence. You know that not everyone has to like you. You know that mistakes don't end conversations. And you know that confidence doesn't mean feeling comfortable all the time. It means trusting yourself to handle the moments when you don't. And in that moment, you'll realize that all those small conversations were never really small. They were practice, preparation, training for the opportunities, relationships, and experiences that were still waiting for you. So don't underestimate the next simple conversation. The person standing beside you may remain a stranger, or they may become someone important in your story. You can't know before you speak. But even if you never see them again, you may walk away slightly more confident, slightly more adaptable, and slightly more prepared for the next conversation. And that's the real power of talking to strangers. Every time you choose connection over unnecessary fear, you're not only meeting someone new, you're becoming someone new too.